Great. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Region 7 Stakeholder Advisory Committee meeting. And today is Tuesday, June 28th, and we're going to be on from about 10 to 12 today. So, and as I start all these meetings, or I try to remember to, I just wanted to take a few minutes and remind all of us what our goals are here. Examining community challenges and opportunities related to land use, preparation of goals and strategies to implement a regional vision, and recommending changes in zoning. So that's kind of our task. Again, it's just a reminder to everyone. And so we'll go ahead and jump into the opportunity for public speakers. Patrick, do you see anybody who wants to talk today?
We do have at least one guest, but if anybody can indicate by raising hand that they would like to speak for a couple of minutes. And I don't see any raised hands.
I don't either. I'm looking in the chat for people who are here. Are people who are not part of the committee, are they able to use the chat element of this? Patrick, do you know?
I believe so. We had to do a last minute switch yesterday to make this a meeting and not a webinar. So I'm not sure if that changed any of the settings.
Okay. Sounds like Desiree said yes. So is that?
Yeah.
I trust Desiree.
We switched it to a meeting. So normally they don't have access, but this meeting they do. So.
Okay, good. So not seeing any hands, we're going to close that part of the public comments and just remind those who are here as not members of the committee, but in attendance as guests, that they're always welcome to submit comment to the group, either through Patrick, Desiree, myself, or any of the other members of the committee, and their emails are on the webpage for Region 7. So let's move into our old business item, which is approval of the prior meeting notes. I had a chance to read through them last night. I'm hoping that everyone had a chance to take a look at those. So they looked like they read as consistent with our discussions at the last meeting. Does anyone have any corrections they'd like to offer to the meeting notes? Okay, I don't see anyone who has a correction. Is there a motion to adopt the meeting notes as presented?
So moved, Tony Spank.
Hi, Tony, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and adopt those notes as approved by the group. Is that okay, Patrick?
That works, yes.
Excellent. Okay, that sounds great. So now we're going to move into, is there any other old business, Patrick, do you think we need to cover today, Desiree?
I don't have anything, just another reminder to check your dedicated Gmail accounts for any emails. That is the means that the public, the citizens, can get in contact with you. So again, if you want to set that up to forward to your personal email and you need help doing that, contact me or Desiree and we can help you do that. Okay,
great. I do have one other old business item, Patrick and Desiree. I just wanted to remind folks that at our last meeting, we talked about a subcommittee that would start to gather information on transportation and public transportation and connectivity. I know that's a topic that will come up later, but the purpose was for the small group to start to assemble information to bring back to the larger group so that we could save time and energy. And I'm sure there'll be another opportunity for another small work group, but right now I think there's 4 of us on that thread. And if you're interested in that topic, public transportation, just let Patrick and Desiree know, and then they'll go ahead and include you on the list. Where we are right now is we have, what's that thing called we have where they kind of decide when we're going to meet?
Is it, well, a doodle poll, essentially.
Okay, yeah, that. So we have one of those set up, and I think 2 people have responded. I think, we're waiting to hear from the others, but we're going to try and set up a time to do our first meeting and maybe the subsequent meetings. There won't be many for this group, but we want to try and get that started. And I think I'd like to get that started after the holiday weekend. So Keep an eye on that. And if you're one of the 4 who signed up, please respond to the doodle poll. And if you'd like to get on that committee, just let Patrick and Desiree know, and they'll go ahead and include you in the correspondence on that thread. Does that sound right?
Sure does. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to move into new business. And Desiree, I'm working from my old agenda here, but essentially what I believe we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up hearing from 2 presenters today, 2 different presentation groups. And I'll let you talk about that, you guys.
Sure, great. I'll pick it up from here. So yeah, today is going to be a little bit of a different meeting format than we typically have. So we're trying to kind of experiment with some different ways for us to interact to see which you guys find most productive. So we want to both give you information and then also get your guidance on how these region plans can best address concerns. So today we're going to start with a series of very brief presentations, so about 5 minutes, from different experts in water quality, shorelines, and sea level rise. Also just want to mention that conservation and parks, we will cover that topic under our August meeting when we have the Department of Recreation and Parks present. So we're not going to be discussing that part in depth today, even though it is sort of an environmental issue, but we will cover that at a later meeting. So, so yeah, we're going to hear from these presenters at the beginning of the meeting, and then we're going to break into 2 small groups. So we'll have 2 breakout groups. One will focus on water quality, and the other will focus on coastal issues and sea level rise. And in these groups, does someone have a question? Nope. Okay. So in these groups, we will kind of just want to frame the conversation around 4 big questions. So how can the region plans help address this issue? What needs to change? How do we incorporate climate change? And how do we incorporate equity? So we can go outside of those questions too, but it's just a general conversation starter to get the conversation going. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our speakers. We have Eric Michelson, the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration. We have Noel Chow, the Public Outreach Lead for Watershed Stewards Academy. Kelly Krenetz, the lead for the Critical Areas team in the Office of Planning and Zoning. And Jackie Guild, the Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability for the City of Annapolis. So with that, I think we'll do the 4 presentations, and then we'll stop, and then we'll break out into groups. And so we won't actually ask questions directly after the presentations. We'll kind of save questions and comments for when we go into our breakout rooms. So with that, I will ask Eric to go ahead and share your screen.
Great, thanks, Desiree. Again, I'm Eric Michelson, Deputy Director in the Arundel County Department of Public Works. This region is unique in that the work that we do is constrained to the non-City of Annapolis portion of this work. The City of Annapolis has its own public works department, has its own stormwater utility fee, essentially, that allows them to do the sort of work that we're doing in other parts of the county. The county's watershed protection and restoration fee is the sole source of funding at the county level for our work. So as we get into some of those questions about the city versus not city, I think having Jackie here will be very helpful in terms of exploring some of those options. Within the county, our Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration handles most of the stormwater associated work. So we handle collection and conveyance of stormwater. This is a blowout of a culvert that occurred a couple of years ago down in South County on Sands Road. And so our group is responsible for inspecting and repairing culverts and closed storm drain systems, and making sure that those systems are functional. One of the things that I'll mention is that the putting in place a dedicated stormwater fee about 8 years ago now has allowed the county to be much more deliberate in maintaining this stormwater infrastructure, which has been had been sort of a forgotten element of infrastructure for a number of years. I'm going to talk a little bit here about the various generations of stormwater management from a development perspective. So prior to the 1980s, stormwater management really consisted of collecting and conveying stormwater from developed surfaces, from roads, from parking lots and that sort of thing, and putting it in a pipe and then discharging it into our natural areas. So either the closest stream or wooded area, without a lot of regard for what it was doing once it got there. In the 1980s, the first stages of stormwater management went into place in terms of really aiming at flood control. And so what you'll see in some areas of the county are what are called dry detention facilities. Essentially, those facilities, like the one that you see here, were aimed at shaving off the peak of storm flows, so that, again, there wasn't a pulse of flood water downstream, but they provided very little in terms of water quality improvements. And so as time wore on, there became interest in trying to develop stormwater management features that provided both flood control and water quality. And so what you see, and this is probably the lion's share of what most people think about when they think about stormwater management, if they think about it at all, is these wet pond features. Oftentimes in large communities, you might see several of these. In a smaller subdivision, you might see only one or two. But the idea here is that as that stormwater comes off the developed surfaces, it drops into these ponds, and then sediment drops out, and there's wetland vegetation to process the nutrients and that sort of thing. And so it's a dedicated site for treatment of stormwater. And that era of stormwater began in roughly around 2000. About a decade later, the state revised its guidance and put in place a set of rules called environmental site design. And the notion there is essentially, let's try to capture water as close to the source of where it comes from and get it into the ground, ideally, and make sure that it's safely conveyed. And that's been done on projects, I would say, throughout the county and city, probably for the last decade or so. There was some grandfathering that allowed projects to hold to the old standards for the first several years, but for the past probably 7 or 8 years, at least, most of the subdivisions that have gone and have had this kind of stormwater management. This is a project out in West County called Watershed, where I think they did a pretty nice job of integrating stormwater management into the landscape. If you've got creative landscape architects or engineers, there's ways to make these kinds of features part of the landscape amenity and blend them into the overall community. But again, the idea is to have smaller practices that are getting that water into the ground quickly, as opposed to having these huge centralized ponds or other features that we are very used to seeing. Our group really has been focused on meeting the county's stormwater regulatory requirements. And so that's involved doing a number of different things. One of the things that we've done is gone back into old stormwater practices and brought them up to contemporary standards. So this is the county office complex on Riva Road at the Heritage Office Complex, where we took a wet pond, converted it into a stormwater wetland above some restoration work that the Arundel Rivers Federation had done, and providing additional water quality before that stormwater gets down to Broad Creek in the South River. This is another similar kind of project. This was historically a dry detention facility in the Millrace community over off Veterans Highway in Millersville. Again, this was about a 3 or 4 acre footprint in terms of the facility. And what we're able to do is create a stormwater wetland in about 3/4 of the footprint, and then elevate a portion of the basin so that there was a rec area for the community to use. And so this was a nice win-win and opportunity to create habitat, stormwater management where there really had not been any before. As I described earlier, again, sort of the conventional approach has been, let's collect and convey stormwater into the nearest stream or gully. That has a lot of negative consequences downstream, oftentimes, especially if it's large volumes of water. This is Towser's Branch in the area around Crofton. You can see how deeply eroded that stream has been over the last 30 or 40 years. Those big boulders had been placed in an earlier era as a way to try to arrest erosion, and ended up simply getting rolled down the stream. We went in basically and created a series of step pools so that we're able to treat water, get it into the ground. In this area, there's very sandy, gravelly soils, so it's very easy to get water into the ground if you can hold it for any length of time, and restore that area, providing some water quality benefit to Towsers Branch. We also do a lot of stream and wetland restoration. This is Cat Branch in the area around Broadneck High School. A lot of our sewer infrastructure is also in these stream valleys. They put it there so that they can get gravity feed through the sewer lines. Oftentimes it's the lowest point in the landscape, and so it allows them to do that. But sometimes when we have stream erosion or scour, those pipes get exposed. And of course, the risk of them breaking and dumping raw sewage into the local waterways is significant. So we're looking for opportunities to work with our Bureau of Utilities to both address those issues in terms of exposures, as well as get water quality treatment. In this particular case, we were able to bring that stream system up, create this really vibrant wetland complex between two townhouse communities in the Broadneck area, and really create a nice community amenity and a very vibrant ecosystem. We also have a community restoration grant program. I'll mention that because it's something that a lot of HOAs, local nonprofit watershed groups, and even some religious institutions have taken advantage of. A couple of years ago, the city of Annapolis added funding to this program. So there had been sort of a donut hole in this program previously where the city of Annapolis folks were not eligible, but now the program covers the entire county, including the city of Annapolis. And so if you are operating in your community, or you are interested in pursuing some local restoration opportunities, this is a really nice funding source for those efforts. We put about $1 million a year into that program to give out to community organizations. We also have an annual report that we put together. I think Patrick and Michael have circulated this via PDF. This is basically, among other things, an accounting of what we've done over the course of the past year, as well as the funds that we've raised and how we've expended those. And so in an effort to be fully transparent about where those watershed protection and restoration dollars are going, we publish this to keep the public apprised. One of the other things that I'll mention, and then I'll be done to pass it over, is we also have an online mapping program on our website, which is aarivers.org. This shows the projects that we have designed or constructed, and including some projects from our NGO partners. This is roughly the area, that we're discussing today, with obviously the city of Annapolis is grayed out here. But it's got a full delineation of our projects. You can see there aren't many projects, really any projects in the city of Annapolis, because again, the city has its own regulatory program set up to meet its individual permit. But we do have a lot of work that has gone on and is programmed for this area, and you're welcome to check this out and browse it at your leisure. One of the things I'll just mention locally, because it's a project that's been completed recently, is the Caffrey Run Stream Restoration Project was one of our grant-funded projects to Arundel Rivers Federation. That's in Quiet Waters Park. So if you happen to spend any time at Quiet Waters, I'd encourage you maybe to walk the path and check that project out, which was just recently completed and will be planted sometime this summer. So I'll be available for questions later on, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk to each of you, and look forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. I think next I will pass it to Noelle Chow from Watershed Stewards Academy.
Hi, everybody. As one of my colleagues, Terrell Acker-Carter, begins loading the slides, I'm just going to introduce not just myself, but Terrell and Jeff, who are also here with me. Jeff Popp is our new Director of Restoration, who just started with us this past month. And Terrell Acker-Carter is our Community Engagement Specialist. So for those of you who haven't heard about Watershed Stewards Academy before, we're a small local nonprofit that envisions every community in Anne Arundel actively engaged to ensure a healthy environment for all. And just to get you a little background information about how we were founded, how we got started. Well, about a decade and a half ago, some folks got together and they were noticing something about residents in Anne Arundel County and what they want to do about stormwater and addressing stormwater issues. They noticed three things. First, that people desperately want to be part of the solution. But second, that they often have absolutely no idea how to get started. And third, that even though there's all this amazing community goodwill and will to participate and get involved, there hasn't really been a way for county government to, based on its structure, leverage all of that potential support. So that's where WSA comes in. We're born of a partnership between Anne Arundel County Public Schools and the Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration. And we think of ourselves as a hub in the county and in the city for connecting local residents with the resources and the tools they need to be able to address stormwater issues and environmental issues in their own communities. And so the cornerstone of our program since 2009 has been our certification course for Master Watershed Stewards. So every year we train a new class of steward leaders, and these are folks who have stepped up to serve their communities by leading grassroots efforts. So we train folks to be able to use the county mapping application that Eric just shared to get in touch with their local representatives, with their Terminal Watershed organization, or with people like county, so they can really get the best things done for their community possible. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jeff, who will talk a little bit about one of our other programs.
Hi, everyone. So really quick, I just wanted to touch base on our Stormwater Success program. It's a one-of-a-kind course that assists participants, including homeowners association leaders, condo association leaders, as well as realtors, in learning more about best management practices in their community. So whether they want to implement a rain garden in their community or they have a bioretention and they want to learn how to maintain it, that's what this course does. And so for more information, you can visit the Watershed Stewards Academy website.
All right, and another one of our main restoration programs is our Replant Anne Arundel program and also our Replant Annapolis program. But starting with Replant Anne Arundel, since 2013, so between 2013 and 2017, Anne Arundel County has lost over 2,500 acres of forested land, which is the highest county in the state of Maryland of tree loss rate. So we were commissioned and contracted through the county to pretty much plant trees as a pilot program, and that developed into Replant Anne Arundel. And then recently we just started Replant Annapolis, and since 2011, the city of Annapolis has lost over 100 acres of forest canopy. And so Replant Annapolis is just based off of the Replant Anne Arundel model, but it's city-funded tree plantings that we're helping run. And we do that through three main ways, which is our Groves of Gratitude program, which will start this fall. So that's small selected trees that county and city residents can get. And then we partner with a local nonprofit to bring some of those funds that we get from there and donate to them. So this past year, we partnered with the Maryland Food Bank. So we were able to get trees in the ground and also donate to them as well. Recently in the spring, we have our Backyard Buffer program. So that's very similar to Groves of Gratitude, but we have tree and shrub bundles that county residents can get, and that's a partnership with DNR. And then our main program is our Tree Trooper program. So that's engaging and mobilizing city and county residents to plant trees in the ground. So that's what Replant Annapolis is really focusing on. So the same training from there. That's a little bit about us.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Okay, so we will transition to more of the coastal issues now. And I think Kelly Kernetz, you're up for critical areas.
Okay.
Yep, and I am going to share my screen. And
Thanks. Sure.
can everybody see the
Yes.
presentation? Okay.
I can.
Let me know when to advance.
Hi, I'm Kelly Krenitz. As Patrick or whoever did the introductions, actually Desiree, sorry, Desiree. I'm the planning administrator for the county's critical area program. I do want to just clarify that Annapolis City has its own critical area program. So the things that I talk about might be a little bit different in the city itself. You can go ahead, Patrick. In 1984, General Assembly passed a law that, based on the quality of the bay, there needed to be additional protections. In the 4 years after that, the county worked on their program, and that was finally adopted in 1988. It has been amended periodically as required by state law, and we are due for a new rewrite, but we are kind of putting that off a little bit until we get a little bit further into this practice so that we can incorporate any ideas or thoughts that may come up as a result of these groups and these conversations. Go ahead. So in the critical area, there are 3 different designations. IDA is the orange. That's medium to high housing density, commercial or industrial uses. That would be neighborhoods like Cape St. Clair, Cape St. John in this particular, or not Cape St. Clair, sorry, Cape St. John in this particular region where you have small lots. A lot of them are only 100 foot deep, and the area along the waterway is pretty densely developed. LDA is your yellow designation. It's low to medium density. You can see some of the bigger lots that are shown in yellow. A lot of those houses are often outside of the 100-foot buffer. A little bit more habitat exists most of the time. And then you have RCA, which is the green designation. If you're doing a new subdivision in that, it is a 1 lot per 20 acres. However, there are some existing older lots that don't quite meet that designation, but because they're characterized by natural environments and resources, they were designated as RCA when we first did the designations. Those were done in the early 80s, and they were based on the use at that time, not necessarily the zoning. Okay, next slide. Just some development criteria per designation. In the LDA and RCA, you'll have a lot coverage limit. That's somewhere between 15% and 31% based on when the lot was created and the size. All of the HPAs would be protected, and there are forest clearing limitations, and there must be mitigation when you clear. In the IDA, there's no lot coverage limitation except the one that exists per the zoning code. Again, all the HPAs are protected. And the stormwater management requirement is that you must reduce pollutant loadings by at least 10%. Next. Habitat protection areas consist of the 100-foot buffer from tidal waters, which can also be expanded to include wetlands, hydric soils, steep slopes, and highly erodible soils, rare, threatened, and endangered species habitats, anadromous fish spawning waters, non-tidal wetlands, FIDS habitat, which FIDS are forest interior dwelling birds, historic waterfowl staging and concentration areas, and colonial waterbird nesting areas. Next, buffer modification area. There is a 100-foot buffer to tidal waters everywhere in the critical area. State law allowed local jurisdictions to create their own buffer modification or buffer exempt program if they wish to. Ours used to be called buffer exempt. We changed it to modification because a lot of people thought that, buffer exempt, you didn't have a buffer, you didn't have to do anything. But our buffer modification areas are areas where there is no existing functioning buffer. So those would be those smaller lots that are only 100-foot deep. Therefore, all the development on the lot is within the 100-foot buffer. They typically have some sort of armored shoreline, either a bulkhead or stone or something like that. And what we found when we first implemented this program was those people had to get a variance for everything. And that's not necessarily needed for the development of those lots. So in a very brief summary, what our buffer modification area or buffer modification regulations requires is that you can go out to the side and you can go back towards the road, but you can't get any closer to the water than you already are. Next. Okay. Differences between the terms variance and modification. The end result is basically the same. It's when an applicant needs some sort of relief from the regulations. But a variance is specific to Article 18, all critical area regulations and all bog regulations, and that is decided at a public hearing by an administrative hearing officer. A modification would provide relief to anything in the code, anything in Article 17, except for community meetings, adequacy of public facilities, which are, traffic, water, sewer, public safety, schools, anything in the critical area overlay, and anything in the bog overlay. Those are decided by the planning and zoning officer. There is a public meeting, but not a public hearing per se. Next. And then shoreline protection. We've always done shoreline protection, but it's something we're kind of changing the way we look at. Anyone that's familiar with the waterways, you see a lot of bulkheads, you see a lot of stone. We're learning as we grow that that's not the most effective way to protect our shorelines. It's much better to do a living shoreline or a vegetated shoreline. What we're seeing and have been seeing over the past years is, the wave energy when it hits something like a solid surface like a bulkhead, there's no absorption of that. It's just deflected back, and it typically destroys habitats, can affect neighboring properties and those types of things. The storm back in October, it was very obvious that those types of protections didn't work. That storm moved huge boulders, cut away at the soil behind bulkheads. So when you can protect a shoreline using a gradual approach, a softly sloped vegetated shoreline, that energy dissipates and doesn't have the destructive power that it would have if it hit a solid surface. So right now we're working on that as a means to protect our shorelines, address the rising waters, and the different storms that we're starting to have. And it's a new process. It's something, we did discuss last night at a different meeting. We need some education. Most people think that grass won't protect their property. A big rock will. So changing that perception will be something we'll have to work on going forward. But it's definitely, we're definitely getting people to listen, and hopefully you'll start to see a difference when you're out along our shorelines. I think that's it.
All right, thank you. I think our last presenter here is Jackie Guild from City of Annapolis. So go ahead and share your screen if you have something to share, Jackie, or go ahead.
I just tried to share and it didn't work. Let me try again. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, let me just go to a little beginning. Here we go. Okay, so this is from I'll go through these quickly. This was from another presentation, but Michael asked me to just hit some of the problems and solutions that City of Annapolis is facing from sea level rise. And I think most of you guys know some of these, data that I'm sharing with you, but we saw the greatest of all cities of the US that were looked at by NOAA we have the greatest amount of flooding in the last 50 years, nuisance flooding, sunny day flooding. It's increased by 925% in Annapolis. Average 3.9 back in the 60s to 38.3 a year. That's better now that the city has some temporary sump pumps put in place at City Dock. But if we had not put those in, we would be still in that 39 incidents per year range. So, and I thought it was interesting that they found that the top 10 areas based on percentage increase in Annapolis had the largest number of nuisance flood events in the US. And you're probably familiar with these numbers back in the 60s, only 3.8 nuisance flooding days per year. And then if we did nothing at all by 2065, every single day of the year, Annapolis would flood to some extent. I just have some pictures in here to show you. This is what we see a lot. You've seen this before down in, City Dock. This is a typical day at high tide. We have nuisance flooding going on. If with 4 feet of sea level rise, if we went that far, this is what it would look like. This is the Alex Haley Memorial over here, and most of the children are underwater. And then if we had 4 feet of sea level rise, with a storm surge like here on this side where we had Isabella storm surge of 7.2 feet, with sea level rise would be a bit higher. That's with 6 feet plus the 4. And so the buildings would be the first floors would be well underwater along Dock Street. That's obviously something we don't want to see happen. These are our flood plans from 2010 in the blue, showing downtown Annapolis, and then in the red 2050 what's predicted. So there's some definite issues downtown. And then this is Eastport 2010 on the left, showing in blue. And then if you look at Eastport it's even lower than City Dock. And so we have a lot of land lost, a lot of businesses lost, a lot of marinas lost, and we have just, a little sliver of land connecting Eastport in one portion to the rest of Eastport, and then on to the rest of Annapolis. So to deal with some of the flooding situations, I mentioned we put in some temporary sump pumps down at City Dock that are operating pretty well, except on some really extreme tide surge days where we have had flooding. But we have proposed these 2 pumps. We have the south pump in blue outlined here that would drain about 23 acres to a deep well pump that could hold the water and then pump it back into the harbor when water's received. And then in red, we have about a 6-acre area, the north pump drainage area. And that we're definitely going forward with the south pump area, the blue outline. The sump pumps are working pretty well right now. So we're still deciding whether with the City Dock plan that I will come to in a minute, whether we need the deep well pump on the north side. They're very expensive. We're in the millions of dollars for each of these. Some of the money's coming from the city, some from some state funds, and some grant funds. But so we're moving forward with the south pump, which is going to be located behind the Guardians of Memorial that we have down by Newman Street and Compromise Street. We just had a memorial wreath laying today there, but that's where it'll be located, right behind the memorial, Compromise Street area. And then we have some grading modifications. If you've been down to City Dock, you may notice that the seawall is not even all the way around. We have some private property, especially on the Compromise Street side. We need to get it all at the same level. We also need to work with the Naval Academy on making sure our sea walls are at the same height, so we're not directing water onto the Academy grounds or they onto us. It needs to be consistent all the way around. So we have grading modifications that will be done, especially in Newman Street. We need to raise the concrete wall by about 100 feet. We need to raise about 100 feet of the wall to make it consistent all the way around. And then City Dock, as it exists right now, we have this lovely parking lot and completely impervious surface on some of our prime property downtown. There can be a better use. This is a conceptual design, what City Dock could look like and what Eagle Alley could look like in the future. What's integrated here, besides a much more pleasingly as pleasing space aesthetically, and that we could use it for festivals and dances and concerts and all kinds of things, is that there are a lot of resilience aspects worked around. So this area going around it, the paved area, is actually a tiered series of tiers that could be used as benches, sitting areas, display areas, but also it's so that as the water rises, you have some protection there. There also would be flood barriers that could be activated in the event of a storm or storm surge. And we have a great deal of bioswales and other things that BMP is incorporated to retain water on site, soak it in, get some pollution reductions. And then in the parking area, we have some more BMPs put in that area, as well as electric vehicle charging stations and permeable pavers. And other things we're doing a lot, as Eric mentioned, the city is participating for the second year in the Chesapeake Bay Trust Anne Arundel County Watershed Restoration Grant Program. The city put in $300,000 last year. We put in 389,000 approximately this year because we had one grantee last year that did not go through with their project. And these are projects within city limits. And then we're working on every project to work in green infrastructure, rain gardens, bioswales, green roofs, permeable pavers. Watershed Stewards Academy mentioned we're part of Replant Annapolis now. We're trying to get as many trees in the ground to absorb stormwater and pollutants and reduce the urban heat island effect and absorb carbon. This mayor passed a couple months ago our Electric Annapolis multimodal mobility plan with building in EV buses, scooters, bikes, our EV ferry, and making the city overall more bicycle and pedestrian friendly. And then I'm working with the Department of Planning and Zoning on building performance standards to create more energy efficient buildings, resilient buildings using renewable materials. And then the city is constantly looking at ways to increase our solar power, and we've investigated microgrids for communities, especially our low income communities. We work with HACA, the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis, and because we're rebuilding a lot of these communities, they're really outdated as far as building materials and energy sources and energy efficiency. I should have mentioned in the beginning, in my position as Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability, incredibly long title. I work across all departments to build resilience into everything that we do. So I work very closely with the Department of Planning, Public Works, and the Departments of Planning and Zoning on all of their projects. So capital improvement projects such as our new public works building on Hudson Street. I was the person who worked to make sure we're using permeable pavers, and they didn't have any electric vehicle charging stations there. There's a public one, and it's being built so that the public works trucks that we eventually buy that will be electric can charge there, and that there's a green roof element to it and other environmental features, as well as on the grounds. We have a RSC system and doing tree planting wherever we can. So also I work very closely with our Office of Emergency Management on their flood resilience plans and mitigation plans. And then, oh, I need to mention my classmate. The city, the county, and the NSA Annapolis, Naval Support Annapolis, are working together on a project called the Military Installation Resilience Review. And our contractor is Stantec. Some of you may be on some of our stakeholder groups that we ask for information from to help us identify the most critical assets, those we believe are most challenged by climate change, particularly sea level rise, and help us develop projects to start to address these projects that will protect these critical assets. We have finished the information gathering stage and the critical asset identification stage. We're down to identifying the most critical assets. And after we're done with that step, Stantec will select the top 10 projects, most critical assets around these projects, and develop resilience plans for them, start to flesh them out and identify funding sources. The city, the county, and the NSA Annapolis will be funding some of these projects themselves. Others, we will look to the Resilience Authority, the Annapolis and Arundel County Resilience Authority, to come up with new funding for these projects. And the Resilience Authority is underway. We have an offer out to it, a director. That process is still working its way through the county, designating that director position as a county position. But in the meanwhile, Dan Neese of the University of Maryland's Environmental Financing Center and Joanne Throw of Throw Environmental are standing in as the temporary interim executive directors, and are starting to select a board and get the bylaws and the operating procedures in place so that Resilience Authority can start to function and identify critical projects and start finding ways to finance them. And I will end with that. Thank you. Oops.
All right. Okay, thank you to all of our presenters. I know we have some questions from folks. I think just in terms of timing, we'd like to break out into our small groups, and then we can ask questions in those small groups. We will have a chance to, each group will start in one topic, but then we will have time to switch. So everybody will get a chance to be in both topic groups. So like I said, how this is going to start is we'll break you out into groups. We're going to have a Jamboard up for people to write down notes. If you're not comfortable with using Jamboard, that's totally fine. And you can just use the chat function to put in any comments you have there. And we'll do about 25 minutes in the first breakout group. We'll have a short break, and then we will switch and kind of go over what the first groups talked about and add anything to those groups as well. So I'll stop talking. We can do the breakouts, and each leader, I think Patrick and I will be in one, and then Michael Stringer and Jesse from Office of Planning and Zoning will be in the other. So Patrick, do you want to go ahead?
I'm going to open the rooms now. I had preset this, and it looks like for some reason that did not take. So let me see if this works, and I may have to manually assign people. So bear with me a minute.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Are we all back?
Desiree, it looks like Jonathan has volunteered.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so hopefully everyone had some good discussions. I know we did in the water quality group. We have about 13 minutes left, so I think we can spend about 3 to 5 minutes for each group. If you can just kind of summarize what some of the things were that we discussed, and just give a little report out to the whole group. Jonathan, do you want to go first for water quality? You're muted, but.
Sure, guys. For water quality, the discussion really discussed about trade-offs. We all know that stormwater is one of the biggest detractors to water quality. In the city of Annapolis, we get a lot of stormwater downtown. There's a conflict, with the historic district and historic zoning in terms of roofs and gardens and things that we can do on rooftops to reduce that. There's also bigger conflict within zoning code in terms of single-family residential requirements for zoning as opposed to multifamily, as opposed to larger development to reduce impervious by putting office, retail, residential all within the same space. And so a lot of it's looking at the trade-offs between environmental requests, historical requests, and what residents need, and also in affordable housing, right? Where we could really add a huge amount of affordable housing units, even in parts of the city. But the pushback you get, can be from the environmental side, against that. And so it's really looking at the water quality. Another part of the discussion was the prioritization of water quality issues being in the Bay, which can be affected by other states, Pennsylvania, New York, and New York farms, by dams, the Conowingo Dam, but also more importantly, our local zoning and development, which might even have a larger impact right in our own rivers. And so what can we do to reduce that from a monitoring point of view, but also from a zoning point of view, right? To attack that early. Was that a good discussion? I think I hit most things. What does everyone think?
That was good. That was very good.
Oh, and also the last thing was a good point from Tony was incentives from the city and the county authorities, right, for sprinklers or for other density improvement methodologies, right, to allow more density, which reduces the need for more impervious, right, by putting more and more property. And so be it through fire prevention measures or other improvements.
One thing I know for sure, because of being in the fire department and fire service, is that the county has, I think it still has its own fire prevention code and things like that. And it's more it's stricter than the National Fire Protection Association, which the city goes by, NFPA. And because the county they don't have one size fits all as far as areas around the county. That's why they needed their own fire prevention code. city being residential, but also being very historic in a small geographic area, has its code. But the conversation between planning and zoning, the fire department, inspections and permits, those areas had to be communicating together. In some cases, they were not. And one area would allow something that the others couldn't allow. And so who's the end user were the ones that suffered because they were waiting for an answer. So just had to throw that in there. But thank you.
I think that the one other thing I'll touch on is just I think we got a lot of comments about building community support and making sure that there's adequate public engagement, both for, new development projects in the neighborhood and also restoration projects, and making sure the community is involved and informed. All right, so I guess we'll pass it to the Shoreline Sea Level Rise group.
So I guess that's me. This is Leo, for those of you who can't tell. So we talked about, well, what I see on our Jamboard are really three different kind of lanes, if you will. One was about, what can we do to help address the issue? And there was some discussion about renewable energy and solar panel assemblies, and trying to figure out a way to incentivize developers, homeowners, municipalities to embrace the use of renewable energy sources so that we can reduce our carbon footprint. And as we think about what we're doing as the SAC, how can we put things in place in the zoning code that would incentivize people to make good decisions about that long-term, beyond just the rebates that are available for some of them. And then Priscilla had a really good, we had a good discussion about, one of the other things we can do is start to reduce waste by composting. And it is sometimes difficult. In the city, there's a pickup. In the county, there's a couple drop-offs. In our area, there really aren't convenient drop-offs for county residents, and the city ones are really not available to the county. So we might want to include in our recommendations suggestions for where we might provide those facilities, again, as an effort to reduce our footprint by providing some other alternatives for waste. And then we talked about in sea level rise adaptation measures, and really what we're trying to figure out is how to make it possible for people to make good decisions about making things or preparing for or adapting to sea level rise. So what can we tell people about what they can do with their docks? What can we tell people, or how can we help in the code to get houses lifted up out of the floodplain without compromising the overall height of the structure, so that we don't end up with a bunch of flat buildings with low ceilings because of the encroachments of, or the continual shrinking of those two values, the overall height versus the build surface. And then also how we might look at raising the floodplain either through grading or other measures, and how we might be able to do that without disturbing the shoreline to the point where it's damaged. So trying to figure out ways how to deal with, trying to get us out of the floodplain. And then we talked about future planning too, which had to do with, I wonder what happens if we look at, a uniform or a consistent approach to the shoreline in areas that are subject to sea level rise, and how we might try and say, there might be short, medium, and long range goals for elevations that would make the entire community protected. And figuring out ways to handle it so that it's not a single owner problem, but it's a community problem, not just, a neighborhood, but, all of Anne Arundel County as we look at these challenges. So how can we put things in place in the zoning code as we move forward to help those things happen more gracefully and in an integrated way? So that's what I was hearing, and maybe someone else could add something if they're hearing something different. So, okay, sounds like that's our summary from the sea level rise group. So, Patrick, I think I'll go back to you now.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes left. I know that there were people noted that they had a number of questions that they wanted to be able to ask. What I might do is share out this Jamboard as it stands now after these two breakout groups. I'll share that out with you all, and if there are any additional things that come to mind, whether it's items to be added to this Jamboard or questions for any of our speakers that you would like to have addressed, please respond to us and give that to us. And what we can do is we can share these questions out to any of our speakers and try to get any of the answers that you're looking for. Does that sound like a good way to go forward with this conversation?
It does to me, Patrick. I think that sounds great.
Okay.
And I just want to speak to a couple things I heard as we were going through the process. I know that the methodologies to share these ideas so quickly, particularly when we're not together, can be sometimes a little bit, they're not sometimes easy or intuitive. So I know there was some concern about the Jamboards, but I think they're a great tool. And as we think of other things, again, let's continue to share and don't feel like we didn't get an opportunity to talk about something and get it on the board, because this will be memorialized in our shared drive. And so if we want to add things, just share it with the group or Patrick and Desiree and I, and we'll include it in the rest of the discussion. So please don't feel like you've missed an opportunity if that was a challenge.
Yeah, and I was one of them was talking about the Jamboards. I think that is a useful tool, kind of real time when you're listening to discussions. But my question was more, if you do have questions that you need to look at an attachment and you need to pull some, it's not a question that fits on a Jamboard. And will we have an opportunity to share some of those questions with, and it's more with our group. It's not necessarily, I think the speakers are all doing a tremendous job, but one of our responsibilities to our communities is to connect all the dots on these various plans and see what is getting executed. Are the plans talking to each other as a city and the county? Do they have shared goals? And those are more complicated questions and points of view. And I just wanted to know when we'll have an opportunity to have those type of questions.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think we're going to come across this pretty regularly as we're getting so much information from the groups that are helping us kind of understand the broader sense of the problem. So we'll have work sessions where it'll just be our group talking about all of these findings and trying to prioritize and agree to what we think we can affect change on as it relates to code things. So we'll dig back into all of this. So don't feel like we don't have that opportunity. We'll certainly take the time it needs to do so. And if we have to add a meeting or two to make sure that happens, we will. And Patrick and Desiree and I have talked about it already. And we'd like to get to some in-person meetings as we get further away from the high point of this COVID thing.
And if I could add on to that really quickly, this is Mike Stringer, Planning and Zoning. I think, as we heard in these summaries, this group has identified some really important issues that the plan can address. And if the group's okay with that, I think you've given us enough information that we can start to put some of these issues, opportunities, potential recommendations on paper, which then allows us all to collectively think deeper, critique them in more depth. So expand them from the sticky note to, actual, statements. And so that could be, kind of the initial rough cuts of what will eventually be refined into the plan document.
I think that'd be great. That'd be a big help. I also want to just take a minute too and thank everyone who came from the different departments and organizations to help us understand these issues today. I know you're all busy and you have other obligations in your roles at your jobs. And so thanks for making time to take us through this. We appreciate it, and it's really helpful. And the city too. We don't want to leave our friends over at the city, Jackie, out. I know you guys work real hard to make these things better for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you all. Our next meeting is July 26th at this time. That will be focused on housing. So that'll be the key topic there. So I hope you all will mark that on your calendars. And that's all that I have. Leo, I'll let you have the last word.
Great. Does anyone else send any parting comments you want to make before we break?
Just very good meeting, gentlemen, ladies, and those the guests. It's very educational. Even old dogs learn new tricks. I think I'm the oldest one on here.
Well, yeah, it was a great discussion today. Thanks, everyone. With that, I'm going to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
We have a second? That's great. Okay. Everyone have a great week and a wonderful holiday. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe, and we'll get back together after the 4th.
Thank you all. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.